The roads of Skyrim can be a treacherous thing. Mile after mile of silent footpaths surrounded by untamed woodlands, wintry wastes, unforgiving tundra, rocky terrain and exposed grassland. And no matter which way you look, forwards, backwards, sideways to the sky, this treacherous landscape has a way of making you feel as if there's always something out to kill you. And in fairness, that gut feeling is often well-founded. Skyrim's brutal cold can be one hell of a beast to overcome. No wonder its native Nords are such a hardy people, but the threats frequently venture beyond inclement weather. For beyond the oftentimes questionable sanctuary of the cities, the roads are teeming with a constance of dangers consciously ensuring naive travelers never make it to their intended destination. These hazards take many forms, and you'll think nothing of being accosted by a pack of starving, angry wolves, or ambushed by a platoon of bloodthirsty bandits. There's no need to rationalise being assaulted by a bear, nor is there much to discern from slaughtering a boisterous adventurer with a point to prove, but some encounters out here on the roads can be a tad more perplexing. For instance, a less than chance encounter with a notorious faction of murderers for hire.
Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear.
The Black Sacrament has been performed. Somebody wants us dead. But we've only just begun our journey, really. We are but a mouse next to the mountain that we, as the Dragonborn, are destined to become. We haven't remotely had the time to flick anybody on the nose so hard that they'd go to a murderous faction to kill us. Nevertheless, they've come for our blood in particular. And that raises two questions. Who signed this death warrant? And why? So join me today as we tackle yet another mystery that likely wasn't as intentional as it perhaps has a right to be. Who issued the contract? To begin with, we need to clarify something, and that is that the intention of the encounter is not necessarily to be a mega mystery. Just like the mysterious letters from a friend where you receive a note from somebody simply signed, a friend, every time you use the voice, regardless of where or when you do so, even in places where there are no witnesses. This too is just one of those Skyrimisms that simply isn't intended to make sense. Nevertheless, here's a rundown of the encounter and the parameters of it. While travelling Skyrim's lengthy network of dangerous roads, provided you have reached or exceeded the lowly level of 5, there is a chance that on your travels you will be accosted by an assassin of the Dark Brotherhood, and they aren't looking for directions, although I'd be a little bit more concerned about their competence if they could swing their swords in the same postcode as me. These assassins want to see us dead, but they typically aren't an insurmountable challenge to overpower and overcome. However, if you have even an outline of understanding regarding the Dark Brotherhood, you'll understand that there's only one reason why they would be trying to kill us. There's a contract active. Somebody out there is paying good money to see us dead. Unfortunately for both whoever hired this assassin and this assassin personally, it's within our best interest to remain breathing, and the best way to do that now is to ensure our assailant does not. And it's on our assailant's corpse that we can find a note basically confirming what we've already deduced. It reads as follows. As instructed, you are to eliminate John Big Nord by any means necessary. The Black Sacrament has been performed. Somebody wants this poor fool dead. We've already received payment for the contract. Failure is not an option. Astrid. What that translates to, for the uninitiated, is somebody hates us badly. Or at least badly enough to hire a guild of assassins through an elaborate macabre ritual, and then on top pay money to see us die. What's confusing about that is how early in our experience here in Skyrim this can happen, and just how little criteria goes into activating this attack. The threshold of level 5 is interesting because in the grand scheme of Skyrim, by that point, you likely haven't done an awful lot. There's no rulebook for how you play the game, but if for instance you dedicate yourself to the main story, by the time you reach level 5, you've at most escaped Helgen with your life, made your way to Riverwood, then on to Whiterun, been sent after the Dragonstone in Bleak Falls Barrow, after which point you fight a dragon, upon killing it discover you are Dragonborn, and begin your journey from Whiterun to Iverstead to begin the climb up the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar. So a particularly common place for that Dark Brotherhood assassin confrontation to occur is along that very road. What's most baffling and perhaps a bit impressive about that is you haven't really had the opportunity to piss anyone off yet. Regardless of what you do upon escaping Helgen, it's highly unlikely to make that caliber of enemy while leveling at the ordinary rate. That makes who it could be who issued such a contract to send the Dark Brotherhood to end our existence an interesting question, because logically your mind is going to dart to nobody. Who could we possibly have angered to the extent of wanting us dead, who has the resources to not just pay for our murder, but contact the Dark Brotherhood to carry it out? No doubt, long term, it's a list destined to be exhaustive. But, like I said, the encounter can happen very early. Most people on that potential list don't even know we exist yet. So, a popular theory is the assassin is after us for something the player character did before arriving in Skyrim at the start of the game. That's the obvious answer. We get an obvious Elder Scrolls blank slate opening. We were caught trying to cross the border into Skyrim at the beginning of the story, arrested by the Imperials, and that creates an absolute story going forwards that doesn't necessarily give away too many details about what happened prior. Please forgive my footage. The carriage kind of gave up. However, we do know that we ventured into Skyrim, likely from Cyrodiil, for some reason, and perhaps being pursued by the Dark Brotherhood could contribute to that reason. It is an RPG after all, you could roleplay that reason absolutely. So maybe the person who hired the Dark Brotherhood to slaughter us could indeed be somebody from the player character's past. However, here's why I don't believe that. By the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the Dark Brotherhood aren't in especially good nick. The entire faction is almost entirely based out of the sanctuary nearby to Falkreath, and furthermore how they traditionally operate is kind of skewed. We know how one contacts the Dark Brotherhood, the Black Sacrament as outlined by the book A Kiss, Sweet Mother. The Black Sacrament is a ritual that goes as follows. You must create an effigy of the intended victim assembled from actual body parts including a heart, skull, bones and flesh. Encircle that effigy with candles. The ritual itself must then commence. Proceed to stab the effigy repeatedly with a dagger rubbed with the petals of a nightshade plant, while whispering this plea. Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear. Naturally, those performing the ritual are going to want to do so under complete secrecy, away from prying eyes and ears. And there's no way of telling that it actually worked until a Dark Brotherhood assassin appears in your home one night. How the Dark Brotherhood find out that the Black Sacrament has been performed is via the Night Mother. It is her immortal spirit that hears the prayers for the death of another and passes the information on to the listener. The Dark Brotherhood, circa 2 centuries deep into the 4th era, does not have a listener. Therefore, they rely on rumours to find out who's performing the ritual and keep up the appearance that it works, when in actuality, it does not. At least, not until the Night Mother chooses a new listener. And since that is our role to play within the Dark Brotherhood, should we choose to pick that questline up, I think it's fair to say that without us, there is no listener. So, judging by how the Dark Brotherhood go about discovering who is willing to employ their services, and their only semi-functional sanctuary semi-functioning out of Falkreath, there's a case to be made that the contract had to come from somewhere where the members of the Dark Brotherhood would be able to learn about it. That would require a steadfast connection with the place, and considering the Dark Brotherhood's decline, they are barely surviving in Skyrim, never mind anywhere else. So much so that Cicero, the Keeper of the Night Mother, has brought her here. And if this is as good as it gets for the unholy matron, as indicated by Cicero's journals, then things really are not going so well. This doesn't totally eliminate the prospect that the contract did originate from outside of Skyrim, but arguably it considerably evaporates the likelihood of that. Therefore, the confines of the province itself becomes the obvious place to look. And there are a few theories that could most certainly be fashioned. While the Dark Brotherhood in Skyrim initially relies more on rumour than the Black Sacrament itself, for those wishing to establish contact with the Dark Brotherhood, the Black Sacrament is still very much so in vogue. Visible evidence of the ritual being performed is incredibly rare, and more often than not they're accounted for, meaning we know who that person wants to kill. But there is one instance where that's not the case. This example can be found in Riften, in the home of everybody's favourite cold-blooded reprehensible matriarch of a crime family, Maven Blackbriar, a truly nasty piece of work who has no qualms telling us why we shouldn't mess with her.
Nothing gets done without my approval in this city. I have the Jarl's ear and the guards in my pocket. Anyone makes trouble for me and I pay a visit to the Thieves Guild. Make me angry and I contact the Dark Brotherhood.
Sure enough, in the basement of her house, we can find the unmistakable evidence that she herself has been performing the Black Sacrament, albeit according to a note addressed to Astrid herself, to limited avail. She wants somebody dead. It is unclear who, and I'm sure she doesn't lack for enemies, nor people she wouldn't mind seeing decapitated besides. So, a theory I've seen in passing is this effigy is for us. We are the intended target. However, in my opinion, the evidence points in the opposite direction. We were attacked by a Dark Brotherhood assassin with a contract to kill us, meaning somebody successfully contacted the Dark Brotherhood and arranged for our murder. Maven's note of frustration, and the fact the effigy is still here in her basement, is all the evidence we need to know that her attempt has not been successful. Furthermore, what reason does she have to want us dead, especially that early? Is she to preempt us becoming a problem for her? But early in the story, we're nobody. She has no reason to believe we exist, never mind know our names. If Maven Blackbriar issued the contract, it would be just as rational for her to issue a contract to kill every living person in Skyrim. So, we can eliminate her. Forgive the pun. Since we now know our efforts are best directed towards other possibilities, there are a couple. And by that I mean I'm sure there are many, and simultaneously zero. For instance, it's worth taking into consideration the natural direction in which fingers will point when somebody tries to off the Dragonborn in an underhanded fashion. That finger points all the way to the Thalmor. This ruling organisation of the Aldemari Dominion are most certainly a crafty bunch, and that is a recipe for endless shenanigans when they're also elven supremacists. They were a bitter enemy to the Empire during the Great War, but now, following the peace treaty, the White Gold Concordat, that they choose to view as a momentary ceasefire, they have free rein to enforce the ban of Talos worship across the Empire. Naturally, they have a particular fixation on Skyrim, with that being a point of contention within the province, and that is amplified by Ulfric Stormcloak's rebellion. But how do we make the leap between these pointy-eared tyrants and wanting to lop the Dragonborn for existing? You see, the emergence of the dragon crisis is an interesting one for the Thalmor. On the one hand, they probably aren't too eager to be eaten by a dragon themselves, but when you take into consideration the damage it does to the Empire, you could most certainly make an argument that the further destabilization is fortuitous. Just like the Stormcloak uprising destabilizes the Imperial grip on Skyrim, as indicated by their dossier on Ulfric Stormcloak suggesting that they have an interest in that war being as long as possible, and are cautiously investigating the return of the dragons themselves. If anything, they view the dragons' interference in the political climate of Skyrim as somewhat convenient. The appearance of a dragonborn hell-bent on resolving this crisis might, short-term, not necessarily be ideal for them. Furthermore, long-term, considering the man that would later become Talos the Divine, Tiber Septim the Man was also dragonborn. If nothing else, a Dragonborn is a huge symbol of morale among Talos worshippers whom the Thalmor seek to oppress. And while we're at it, what's the likelihood this powerful being is going to side with them? The fact is, chances are almost certain the Dragonborn is a powerful enemy the Thalmor do not want, who will only go stronger the longer they are left to devour dragon souls, depriving them of a twisted short-term convenience and proving to be an increasingly powerful long-term threat because of it. So they'll most certainly have all the motivation they will ever need to top us. The Dragonborn's very existence puts them in a position they cannot win. So there are two questions. Firstly, would they stoop to assassinate us? The answer is obviously yes. They try it for other reasons during the story, but they don't use the Dark Brotherhood. Instead, they send a Khajiit. They send one after us in Riften. They send one after Malbon in Windhelm. That does lead into a runoff question, but the primary question is answered. Yes, the Thalmor are not above sending assassins to carry out their dirty work. The second question is, will they be equipped with the knowledge that we are the Dragonborn so quickly? And to me, the answer is yes, but only in theory. We'll come back to that in a minute when I start poking holes in my own logic. We don't exactly find out we're the Dragonborn privately. We do so fighting a dragon alongside the guards of Whiterun. Upon ripping that dragon a new backside, it's those guards who tell us we're Dragonborn, and they're in awe. They won't be able to keep their mouths shut about it. In Skyrim, word travels fast. Guards often mention the fact we're Dragonborn in passing, among many other things and events we may or may not be involved with. So, from that moment, us being the Dragonborn was never a secret to begin with. So to answer how word might theoretically spread to the Thalmor, easily. They're no strangers to clandestine operations, so I find it hard to imagine they wouldn't have inside operatives, feeding them valuable information from all the holds in Skyrim. So in other words, they're equipped to find out about the emergence of a Dragonborn in Whiterun Hold, and in fairness that information spreads through Skyrim like wildfire. So at the very least they're going to know that, and would be curious to find out more. So it's hard to imagine in wake of this revelation they wouldn't be in contact with their operatives in Whiterun. After all, the Jarl's stance against them being in his city would make establishing a Thalmor spy network here a higher priority, because they can't waltz in under the guise of allegiance. But who could possibly, under the Jarl's nose, be feeding sensitive information to Elenwen? Well, as it turns out, there may be an answer. You see, during the quest, diplomatic immunity were sent to infiltrate the Thalmor embassy in Hafingar on behalf of the Blades to find out what they know about the return of the dragons. At their modest function, we can see many of Skyrim's important people. Imperial-aligned Jarls, diplomats, business people, and for some reason the Jarl of Whiterun's steward, Proventus, is here.
Trust me, there's no place better to forge relationships with the movers and shakers of Skyrim.
Enjoying the party, Proventus?
Oh, hello there. I didn't expect to see you here. Yes, I am indeed. Elenwen always serves the best wine at her parties. The food is excellent as well. Though I confess, being surrounded by so many wealthy and important people makes me feel more than a little nervous. The Empire is fortunate to have the support of the Thalmor during this difficult time, don't you think?
Sir Balgruuf's steward, Proventus, is a regular at Elenwen's parties at the Thalmor embassy. In fairness, I have a hard time believing that the Jarl doesn't know about this. In fact, he probably sends Proventus so he doesn't have to deal with the Thalmor himself. After all, we know Balgruuf is no fan of theirs, and Proventus isn't too startled to see us. So I don't doubt he's here on above-board official business, but what from the Thalmor's perspective makes him an acceptable substitute for the Jarl? And under a microscope, what kind of character is Proventus and where do his loyalties lie? Firstly, the steward is an Imperial, which I suppose would be more interesting were the housecarl not a Dunmer. What's more interesting though is Proventus is quite the meek, nervy individual. In certain topics, such as the discovery of a Dragonborn, he doesn't necessarily put his best foot forward vocally speaking, and it's interesting to see how that leads to his input being underappreciated by the court.
Rungar, calm yourself. What does any of this Nord nonsense have to do with our friend here? Capable as he may be, I don't see any signs of him being this, Dragonborn.
Nord nonsense? Why, you puffed up ignorant. These are our sacred traditions that go back to the founding of the First Empire.
Hrongar, don't be so hard on Avenicci.
Whether he intends it or not, there is more than one instance of Proventus being a professional wrong-way rubber. However, there's more to how he formats what he says. If we ask him questions following the discovery of the ancient power within us, he persists to take a dismissive tone.
The only thing I remember is the old story of Tiber Septim being called Dragonborn by the Nords, before they switched sides and joined the Empire. No doubt those greybeards up at High Hrothgar will talk your ear off about it. Near as I can tell, a bunch of ancient Nord hermits who live on top of a mountain. Never heard of them talking to anybody before. Old Nord folktales always talk about shouting their enemies to pieces. I always thought it was just a myth.
You could stretch and say he holds some venom towards Nord custom and believes the Nords were better off under the Empire. His presence at the embassy implies his alignment with the Empire, even if his Jarl wishes to remain neutral in the Civil War. So perhaps he will make moves to encourage the Jarl towards siding with the Empire down the line, which we know he does if we do the Civil War questline, because he fears the rise of a hero of Nordic legend might have the opposite effect. Hence, Proventus is reluctant to accept that we are the Dragonborn, because he overestimates the impact that will make on his underestimation of Balgruf's pragmatism. So perhaps he passed word along. The Thalmor got in contact with the Dark Brotherhood knowing their Khajiit operatives wouldn't be enough, which is the imagined answer of mine to the offshoot question I alluded to earlier, being why wouldn't the Thalmor use their own assets? And then the Dark Brotherhood bids to intercept us before we meet with the Greybeards and officially become too powerful. It's a plausible theory, but brace yourselves, I'm about to highlight why it's wrong. Firstly, it assumes the Dark Brotherhood assassination attempt has anything to do with the fact that the player character is the Dragonborn, because it can occur before we discover that if we play the game in an unorthodox way, or the way a Bethesda Game Studios title is meant to be played. Any assumption that our being the Dragonborn is in any way relevant to why the Dark Brotherhood want to kill us requires us to pick and choose how literally we want to take the game. The premise of the theory can neither be valid nor invalid as a result, nevertheless it's a fundamental flaw in the footing. Secondly, while it can reasonably be concluded the Thalmor know there's a Dragonborn active in Skyrim, we know for a fact they don't know who it is this early. During the quest Diplomatic Immunity, we can introduce ourselves by our actual names to Elenwen, and she won't know who we are. As the Thalmor ambassador in Skyrim, if she doesn't know, nobody under her does.
Ah, yes. I remember your name from the guest list. Please, tell me more about yourself. What brings you to this... to Skyrim?
Why this is important is because diplomatic immunity is likely to occur after the earliest point at which this Dark Brotherhood assassin might spawn. The early leveling in Skyrim is ordinarily quite brisk, and following this quest, when our association with the Blades is apparent to the Thalmor, when we nip over to Riften to get Esben, we're attacked by one of their Khajiit assassins that they seem awfully fond of, and following destroying her in combat, on her body we can find a note that confirms Elenwen sent her and does not allude to the fact that we're the Dragonborn in any way whatsoever. If they resorted to using the Dark Brotherhood earlier, why would they regress to in-house operatives? The only logical conclusion is the contract came from elsewhere. However, before we move on to exploring another theory, I will throw this one a lifeline. Elenwen's letter didn't mention us by name. Should we choose to give her our name at the party? She claims she remembers our name from the guest list, but before we can make a lasting impression, she's interrupted by Malbin. During that quest, the Thalmor do become aware an operative from the Blades is active in their embassy, but what if Elenwen didn't put two and two together? After all, you can only imagine she is exceptionally busy. It's quite easy to forget the details to problems you think will be resolved with one trick, and it's not like the Thalmor as a whole lack for arrogance. So you could certainly argue haze to make the theory stick, but considering Elenwen puts two and two together before us at High Hrothgar during the much later quest, Season Unending, it's made abundantly clear she knew precisely which guest was the party crasher. but only then atop the throat of the world realises that same person is the Dragonborn. I would absolutely love to know what this season Blade Delphine was thinking, getting us an invitation to the Thalmor embassy using our actual name. But to get back on track, that final point to me confirms the only reasons the Thalmor have to kill us are the ones we provide them with directly. Not that attempting to assassinate the Dragonborn would be entirely out of character for them if they knew early enough. So I feel quite confident in saying our gaze can turn to other prospects. Now, I think it's fair to say, upon our arrival in Skyrim, we immediately get to work on irking others. As early as Helgen were forced to make a choice as to whether we side with Ralof or Hadvar, even if only momentarily, it still dictates whose soldiers will end up killing for the next 10 minutes or so. We can also immediately peel off and start punting bandits and other unsavouries, the point being we waste no time making enemies, so it isn't difficult to pinpoint clear examples of individuals or conceptual individuals who'd like to see us die, but I think the vast majority, if not all of those, would like the pleasure themselves. Your average bandit has a sturdy weapon and the slightest idea how to use them loaded up on alcohol and hubris. They wouldn't think they'd need the Dark Brotherhood to see us die, and they'd probably like to do it themselves, because hardly any bandits in Skyrim possess the nuance to not immediately attack us on sight. As for Stormcloak and Imperial soldiers, they most certainly wouldn't resort to an assassin organisation, because more than they hate us, they typically believe in something incompatible with that. And if they did hate us enough to want to kill us, they'd also want to do it themselves. So that leaves us in a tricky limbo I like to call no clear options. There are countless people in Skyrim who want a piece of us, but most of them have no trouble picking up arms themselves, and for those who don't, for instance citizens whom we steal from, they'll send hired thugs to confront us, resulting in confrontations that are neither discreet nor precise. After all, you don't need them to be to teach a thief a lesson. The point I'm making is to have the Dark Brotherhood out for blood on our tails, we need to meet some awfully particular criteria. And the person issuing the contract also has to meet particular criteria, meaning we can't be just anyone, nor can whoever it is that is invested in seeing us dead. And to add further confusion to the mix, based on how Bethesda RPGs are formatted, not everything we do is going to be relevant, because rationally, not everything we do is canonically the action of the same person. In Skyrim, if you choose to do all of the content, you become a high-ranking member of the College of Winterhold, the Thieves Guild, the Dark Brotherhood, the Companions, and either the Imperials or the Stormcloaks. All of that while single-handedly unravelling the end of time. It doesn't matter what ancient sacred power you have, that is a ridiculous workload. So either the Dragonborn is the ultimate workaholic final boss, or the simultaneously occurring turnover in leadership in all these major factions are the culmination of the stories of other individuals, meaning the listener we can become is the life of somebody else. So with that in mind, we can turn to focus on the game's intention behind the Dark Brotherhood attempt on our life so early on. The attempt is vague enough that it could theoretically apply to any life we choose to inhabit within this game, but its intention above all else on a game level is to introduce the player to the concept that the Dark Brotherhood is present here in Skyrim, so we know they are a faction we can join. So perhaps the contract takes on different meaning for the different characters the player character represents. There's a bit of role-playing involved here, so for most, provided your path doesn't intersect with the Dark Brotherhood questline, you can dismiss the encounter as an imagination spark for your backstory. A budding Master Thief is sure to already have enemies, as is a great warrior or a highly capable mage. Even the Dragonborn had an entire upbringing that we aren't privy to. We have to fashion that for ourselves. But if our playthrough does involve doing the Dark Brotherhood questline, one can't help but note the coincidental timing. So you are telling me that the individual who would later become the listener just so happens to have an untraceable, unexplainable Dark Brotherhood contract on their heads at the same time that the Night Mother is being brought to Skyrim, while the organisation makes strides farther and farther away from its traditions, to the point where they are fighting an uphill battle to retain their mystique, while disregarding everything that actually makes them the Dark Brotherhood. All the while, this supernatural force is laying dormant, waiting for the right person to become the listener, knowing full well the Brotherhood has strayed so far from its ethos that it will need to be purged to start anew. I do not necessarily know how, but I have a sneaky suspicion that events are transpiring according to the Night Mother's plan. And I suppose a Dark Brotherhood assassin trying to kill us may not necessarily be about killing us. Let's harken back to the words of the Black Sacrament, the avant-garde ritual to summon the Dark Brotherhood that's so convoluted, the person performing it may as well carry out the murder themselves. Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear. I always interpreted this as a declaration from the one performing the ritual, that they are so desperate and dedicated to see a particular individual die, that they are willing to create an effigy of humanoid remains representing their victim, and as a result of going through with something so profane, prove themselves worthy of the Dark Brotherhood's, or more accurately the Night Mother's, time. And I shan't argue against the emphasis on the demonstration of commitment. However, what if that's not all there is to these words? After all, the end of the next paragraph reads, "So begins a contract bound in blood." And the explicit use of the word contract is critical here. It doesn't necessarily exclusively apply to the agreement between the one hiring the Dark Brotherhood and the assassin agreeing to take on the kill. That is a much simpler transaction. The assassin kills somebody, and the client pays. However, to secure that outcome, they deploy a religious ritual to contact the Dark Brotherhood via the Night Mother. I can't imagine a deity has any use for gold. If you're invoking an otherworldly power, they must get something out of it. So begins a contract bound in blood makes sense. If you perform the ritual, and the Dark Brotherhood show, somebody has to die. And I have a feeling the force that powers the ritual is going to be less particular about who than either the client or the assassin themselves. For the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear does not clarify who the unworthy is. And I didn't come away from an encounter with the Dark Brotherhood assassin who was reasonably easy to kill, feeling especially unworthy. And I most certainly don't feel awfully baptized. So what if this encounter was the Night Mother testing us somehow? After all, the unworthy ended up being an assassin representing the Dark Brotherhood. A Dark Brotherhood that has strayed from its tenets, strayed from the Night Mother. And in slaughtering one of these pretenders, we are already executing the Night Mother's will. Long before we even join the Dark Brotherhood, we prove our worthiness. But if the purpose of almost being gutted by a Dark Brotherhood assassin along the roadside was to function as a practical assessment, how could that possibly be set in motion? The Night Mother isn't exactly talkative. The Dark Brotherhood hasn't had a listener in over a decade. The Brotherhood itself, as outlined by Cicero's journals, has dwindled down to one active sanctuary. Without somebody to hear the Night Mother, the Black Sacrament often goes unheard. What separates the Dark Brotherhood from any old band of cutthroats is slowly dissipating, and with that the sum of contracts they're able to learn about, never mind execute. In accordance with the book The Night Mother's Truth, which outlines an anecdote of what exactly the Night Mother is, the Void must be starving for souls, and it's the Night Mother's destiny to ensure the Void is satisfied. You can logically conclude she'll actively influence events to achieve that end. After all, that is the purpose of her communications with the listener in the first place, and it's hard to imagine since the fall of the last listener over a decade prior to the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, that while she hasn't been communicating with any one member of the Dark Brotherhood, she hasn't been involved at all. She's aware of the situation. Of course she is. She knows who performs the Black Sacrament, regardless of where or how secluded. It's almost omnipresence. Who's to say it ends there? It most certainly doesn't seem to, coming together so conveniently. A newcomer shows up to the Dark Brotherhood, turns out to be the listener, who just so happened to have a contract out on their heads before joining, and not long after joining, they're sent by the Night Mother to meet with the Mand Motier who wants to assassinate the Emperor Titus Mede II, setting in motion a series of events that brings about the destruction of the Dark Brotherhood in its current corrupted form, and the deaths of the bulk of its membership, so the listener and Night Mother can rise from the ashes and begin the Dark Brotherhood anew, liberated from Astrid's irreverent leadership and her influence. I have a particularly tough time believing this run of events snuck up on the Night Mother. I also struggle to believe she wasn't aware that the conspiracy to assassinate Titus Mede II would lead to Commander Morrow putting the Falkreath Sanctuary to the sword, establishing the likelihood that she played into the counter-conspiracy with the aid of the listener, because that is precisely what she wanted to happen. With that in mind, the Night Mother has gained much from our fortuitous, timely arrival at the Falkreath Sanctuary. She knew that as a listener we would heed her guidance. She knew that Astrid's hubris would be the end of her. And she knew the high-profile assassination of the Emperor would result in plenty of death and tempt Astrid to work alongside her, for her own reasons. And none of this would be possible if we didn't coincidentally arrive. Us, a pesky nomad, whom, for mysterious nebulous reasons, the Dark Brotherhood was previously contracted to kill, alerting us to the Dark Brotherhood's presence in the province like a beacon, sending the most incompetent lizard they could find to charge at us out in the open and die by our blade. All that's happened here is we've learned the Dark Brotherhood is present in Skyrim, and if we're so inclined, it's an option. In which case, the Night Mother knew we would take it. It's unclear to what extent she possesses the ability of foresight, but in the Dark Brotherhood quest line of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, in our meeting with the Night Mother, she makes the suggestion that she's perceptive towards prospects from quite an early age. At the culmination of the questline, she suggests she's been aware of Matthew Bellamont's betrayal, or at least his intentions to undo the Dark Brotherhood, to destroy the Night Mother from when he was just a boy. She also refrained from telling her listener about the traitor in the Brotherhood's midst to avoid awarding incompetence. And this tells us two things. The Night Mother possesses the ability to observe us predating us joining the Brotherhood, allowing her the knowledge required to potentially contrive events. And the second thing is, she is more than content to play the long game. This is demonstrated in Oblivion with her supposed knowledge of Matthew Bellamont's betrayal, yet refusal to act as an object lesson. And perhaps because she also knew that the idiot would try to attack a ghost. I'm not sure what he was thinking. And in Skyrim, she again demonstrates her big picture orientation. Having not chosen a listener in over a decade, she has allowed the Brotherhood to wither. She allows Astrid to lead her way because she knows it will lead to her ultimate downfall. And it's only through that that a guild worthy of the Dark Brotherhood title can rise again. Both Oblivion and Skyrim's Dark Brotherhood quest lines show the Night Mother methodically maneuvering to ensure the compromised variant of the organization is stripped back to the fundamentals and started again, satisfying the void with much death along the way. She isn't whimsically interjecting at crucial moments. Her control over the Dark Brotherhood and the events regarding it is precise and decisive. With that in mind, granting us the unholy honour of becoming the listener in Skyrim isn't something she chose in the moment to do because we were there and we were better than the alternative. If we choose to view her as the architect of events, the unholy matron almost certainly engineered our presence. The survival of the Dark Brotherhood cannot rely on fortunate coincidence. She certainly likes to imply the listener is party to a destiny foreseen by Sithis.
Yes, dear child, yes. The Dread Father foresaw it all. You were meant to kill the traitor. You were meant to be named listener of the Black Hand. You possess strength and cunning, and a heart as black as midnight. You were marked by Sithis the moment you emerged from your mother's womb.
It's unclear if this means the listener is actually destined to become the listener, or if it just means that their potential was noted from a very early age. It does nevertheless imply some power has been monitoring prospects, and this can more or less begin at birth. So if we assume the player character in Skyrim is at youngest in their early 20s, their life would have overlapped with the previous listeners who died in the 188th year of the Fourth Era. by which point the Dark Brotherhood's decline was already noteworthy. According to Cicero's journal, that listener, Alessandre Dupre, was somewhat preoccupied with finding a way to ensure the Dark Brotherhood's future before her demise, and while Cicero's journal limits that to unsuccessful ponderings before she was killed, she had the Night Mother's words. Who's to say the Night Mother didn't deploy some foresight to set something in motion? You know, the outline of a contract to be delivered to the Falkreath Sanctuary in over a decade's time. A letter sent forth by the Keeper Cicero, perhaps. Or perhaps this is the letter the Night Mother had the listener draft, imitating Astrid to intercept an assassin with on the roadside. After all, in the Dark Brotherhood questline, we don't get these letters. Our orders are issued face-to-face, verbally. This might suggest our assailant has been on the road a while, receiving orders via dead drops. And just like as seen in Oblivion, dead drops sound like a fantastic idea at first, but with a smidgen of knowledge as to where they might be found, they can be tampered with, sending dark brothers and sisters to kill people unsanctioned by the Night Mother. A tampered with dead drop would also explain why nobody in the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary mentions the fact that we have a Dark Brotherhood contract active on our heads by the time of our joining. As far as they're aware, we don't. Even Cicero wouldn't know the contents of the letter. He's too loyal to the Night Mother. He wouldn't have allowed his temptation to make him peak. He would simply follow his instructions. And as for how this encounter can happen multiple times, perhaps there were multiple copies of these same instructions placed in different dead drops for travelling assassins to find, alongside a portion of the already received payment, meaning their only duty now is to track us down and kill us, with only the Night Mother knowing the odds in that situation are still in our favour, both drawing our attention to the Dark Brotherhood's existence, leaving it up to us to seek them out, and giving us a very sour first impression of Astrid for trying to have us killed. This might also clarify why Astrid and the members of the Falkreath Sanctuary never mention their fallen comrades, you know, the ones we kill because they're trying to kill us. Are we to believe every member of the Dark Brotherhood has their feet up in the Falkreath Sanctuary at all times? Perhaps there are travelling remnants of the rest of the organisation out there alone, taking contracts where they find them, using dead drops. Without the Night Mother, the only means to be everywhere is to physically be everywhere. With that setup, you'd expect there would be members who don't really come to Falkreath to unwind, whose relations with the rest of the Dark Brotherhood that still exists is either transactional at best or broken up by lots of travel that enables the Falkreath Sanctuary and Astrid to be unaware should they die, since nothing immediately out of the ordinary follows that, alerting them that something is wrong. So maybe by all of that logic, the inexplicable contract came from the Night Mother, carefully planning and meticulously weaving events into reality, playing the long game, preempting events not immediately by stopping them, but by attracting the worthy, and then guiding them to survive whatever she sees coming. Because regardless of whether or not Astrid likes it, the unholy matron's control over the Dark Brotherhood is absolute. Not that it always necessarily makes sense. So perhaps the contract is just an extension to the abstract way in which she wields power. There are many instances you can point to argue she manipulates to assert her leadership and guidance, and it's hard to grasp the extent that might go to when you factor that we're not dealing with a mortal guided by logic, but rather an immortal or otherwise undead entity who predates and survives. That is a tricky game to rationalize in any orthodox fashion. And I most certainly don't wish to make the flawed argument that the theory I just proposed is entirely bulletproof. And the more I thought about it, the more I realised that, though it fell out of my backside, and it's probably quite foolish to throw so much brainpower at a throwaway encounter that wasn't intended necessarily to be a big mystery, unlike the idea that the Thalmor must be involved and are more than happy to throw away their own methods in favour of the Dark Brotherhood for some reason, or the notion that Maven Blackbriar has a tendency to preemptively slaughter strangers, the contract coming from within and being nothing but an elaborate lure lines up somewhat with the Night Mother's brand of elaborate indirect guidance, and lines up incredibly well with this encounter's actual gameplay function, and that is to make the player character and by extension the player aware of the Dark Brotherhood's presence here in Skyrim, and is flexible enough an idea to address why nobody within the Falkreath Sanctuary even makes a passing mention at the fact that they once tried to kill us, or we killed their friends in return. And that's where I'm going to leave that theory. I do like it, I sort of came up with it as I was mulling over this one, but I have to address it's not based on evidence as much as lack of evidence for anything else. And of course evidence that disproves other proposed theories. But hey, that's the fun of theorising, you can come up with utterly insane explanations for things, and I personally like the idea that it's a solitary move in the Night Mother's extra-dimensional chess game. If the reason for something like this isn't something you've done yet, then perhaps the reason is what you're destined to do. Anyway, I'm going to leave this video here before it officially becomes gargantuan. I'd like to thank you all for watching, I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It would all be massively appreciated. And be sure to let me know what you think about any theories discussed, or any other theories you might have heard or proposed yourselves that you haven't seen addressed here, because I'm sure there are too many for the ramblings of a lunatic, like a video such as this, to encompass, never mind do justice. But with all that said, if you fancy joining our Discord server, there is a QR code on screen now that shall lead you to the promised land. So far it's been pretty groovy and hopefully long may it continue. I think the ingress method keeping the numbers down has helped somewhat, but maybe I'm just being pretentious. Anyway, with any luck I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care and goodbye.